So my name is Joelle Piercy. I am the Director of Outreach and Prevention at Safe and Sound Somerset. Safe and Sound Somerset is Somerset County's domestic and sexual violence response organization. We're here today talking a little bit about teen dating violence and sexual assault. And I always love to start these conversations with actually the very first question a teen in Somerset County ever asked me. And that very first question is, why don't adults take our relationships seriously? So what I hope that you get from this evening is some tools, some language to hopefully make some of these issues easier to talk about, easier to recognize, and hopefully feel a little bit more confident in talking about some of these issues. Throughout the whole presentation, I'll use real language and real questions that teens have asked us in our many programs throughout the county. So hopefully you can begin to see how to apply some of this content. A little bit about me. I have a background in social work as well as law and social policy. I'm very much interested in how to create a safer, more just world for everybody. And so that's why I love my work here. I've been here for 6 years. Safe and Sound Somerset, our vision is a community free from domestic abuse where individuals and families thrive in body, mind, and spirit. Our mission is to prevent and respond to domestic and sexual violence with programs that provide safety, support, and education for individuals, families, and the whole community. I'm going to go ahead and put our 24/7 call or text helpline in the chat box there. We want to stress that if anything comes up, you're more than welcome to utilize that service. It is free, anonymous, confidential. 24/7 trained advocates answer the call. They provide supportive listening, information, resources, safety planning, and they can connect you to our other services and programs. So where has this presentation come from? So to give you a scope of what we do and specifically what my department does. So since 2016, we have actually worked with and now it's actually over about 16,000 teens who have asked us countless questions. We use an anonymous polling system called Poll Everywhere, where they can share their thoughts and reactions, but they can also ask questions anonymously. And what's really neat about that is that it really gives us a really in-depth look in terms of how young people are experiencing these issues, how they're experiencing relationships, what they're thinking about, what they want to talk about. These are just some of the examples, and throughout the whole presentation, I'll use the real questions that young people are asking us. The common thread is, though, they are desperate. They are desperate to talk about relationships. They are desperate to talk about violence and sexual violence because they are seeing it, whether it's in their own life, in their friend's life, in their peers' life, in social media. They have so many thoughts and experiences. And so, again, the goal of all this is to become more comfortable talking about it. A couple of resources that I want to let you know about. We do have an Ask Ava podcast. It is available on our website, safe-sound.org. And it's where we actually answer some of those real questions that we get. Every week, we come out with a new episode, 3 to 5 minutes long. Although it was geared towards teens, we found that parents and professionals who work with teens have actually found it just as helpful to hear how we begin to answer some of these questions and provide information. We also have a series of free services for adults and young people. I'm going to talk a little bit about young people, but I will refer to all of our programs later on. So again, we have the 24/7 call or text helpline. We will speak to anyone that calls, no matter what the age is. Again, it's anonymous and confidential, but we are mandated reporters. So if a young person reaches out to us and they disclose abuse or neglect by a caregiver or someone in a supervisor role, for like instance, a teacher or babysitter, that is something that we would need to make a report about, right? But otherwise it is anonymous and confidential. They don't need parental consent to use that hotline. We have individual counseling. I'll talk a little bit about the ages later. We can see individuals 13 and older without parental permission if they've experienced sexual assault. For counseling up to 18 for dating violence or relationship violence or domestic violence, we have the free counseling, but we would need parental permission for those, okay? We have legal advocates that can help with restraining order and protective orders. We also have a sexual assault response team, which I'll talk about shortly. And if you happen to not be in this area or know people outside of this county, every single county has a similar organization. So you can find those services at that link. And I will be distributing the PowerPoint later to people who registered. So the sexual assault response team, we find that this is really, really important for people who work or live or care about young people. It is a free resource. Any child who is 13 years or older and has experienced a sexual assault within the last 5 days can activate the sexual assault response team. I want to stress that they don't need parental permission to activate the sexual assault response team. And also they need to make the choice. So like, let's say a parent or guardian says, I really want you to activate the SART team. We can't do it. It has to be the survivor themselves who activates these services. And it involves a volunteer advocate from our organization, a nurse, and a police officer. And so let's say the teen just wants to talk to an advocate, that's fine, right? Or they only want to talk to a nurse and an advocate, or they want to talk to all three, or they change their mind, that's okay. Every single part of anybody's interaction with our organization is completely at will, what you want and what the survivor wants, okay? To activate any of those services, you can call our helpline. We actually, on our website, on our social media, we have an Ask Ava video, a special episode that specifically talks answering teens questions about the SART programs. And so it's a good resource to have just in case a young person ever discloses either that they or a friend has experienced sexual assault. Okay. So I want you to think a little bit about what you might have heard adults say about teen relationships. And this could be what you heard as a young person. It could be it could be things you've heard other adults say. I'll say this, it could be even something I've said, right? Or maybe you remember saying at some point, right? So which one of these things have you heard? And feel free to put any of the numbers in the chat box, right? So 1, it's not a real relationship. They're too young to know what they're doing. It's not that serious, right? Oh, we don't have to talk about dating or sexual violence until they're in college, until they're going to college, or until they're graduating high school. That kid is so charming. They would never hurt anybody. It's not like this relationship is going to last forever. This isn't that serious. Nothing that goes on in it can be that serious. All teen relationships are toxic. How serious can the abuse really be? Or I'm sure both kids are at fault. Have any of you ever heard any of these things from adults? In previous sessions where we've done this, generally each one of these things, multiple people have heard at some point in their life. And I want you to think about this idea that if we have heard adults say this, then the teens have heard adults say this. And if this is what they've heard, how easy is it going to be for them to talk to the adults in their life about relationships, about violence? It's going to be hard, right? And again, that's the very first question I ever received. The first time I launched that anonymous questions tool, the very first question that they gave me was, why don't adults take our relationships seriously? And that's been a common theme I've heard over and over and over again from young people, is that the adults in their lives think that because these are new relationships, because they don't think they're going to last forever, that they're dismissive of them. We've also been seeing a increase in kids who say, I've told someone that I experienced violence in a relationship and they didn't believe me, right? They didn't believe me. So we're hoping today to give you some tools to make it easier to take things seriously, to make it easier to talk about this and to understand that it's serious to them. And one way to do that is I want you to go on a little journey with me. I want you to go back to your 12-year-old self. And I am going to be completely vulnerable here and show you a picture of my 12, 13-ish self, right? I look at this picture, and I'm the older one here, with the bangs and the hair that covers the face, the big glasses. I was trying to go through this like skater wannabe stage. I definitely wasn't a roller skater or a skateboarder. But again, I just feel the awkwardness oozing out of me at this stage. And I want you to think about yourself as a 12-year-old. How did you feel about yourself? How did you feel about your body or your personality? How did you feel like you compared to the people around you? Speaking of the people around you, whose opinion mattered to you? Who did you care about and what they thought of you? Whose approval did you try to get? And then let's think about relationships. How did you experience feelings of attraction? At 12, were you already experiencing feelings of attraction, crushes? Had you started dating? Had others around you started dating? How was your relationship with the adults in your life? Were you comfortable talking with them? If not, why not? And if yes, what made you comfortable with them? Right? I find that one of the best ways to start relating to the young people is to every now and then go back to that inner self, that inner child that we have, right? That us as adults, we're shaped by those experiences, and acknowledging that in our conversations. And as we begin preparing to understand these issues and talk about them, I really urge you to have difficult conversations frequently. And it can be lighthearted sometimes, right? It's really an ongoing process. One teen said to me, they said, oh, one time it was just like they had to talk one time and then it was done. And it was like, okay, you have the knowledge now. I've done my job, right? But it's an ongoing process. It's really interesting. A lot of times, some of what we talk with young people about, it may seem easy to understand or may seem like really basic, but there's so much that they need to be taught, right? And again, that's an ongoing process. Do your own research. You'll feel more confident, right? And assess your own values ahead of time. Identify ahead of time what you're willing to share. Again, we all come to these topics with our own experiences, and that's going to influence our conversations with the young people. And there's going to be things that you're going to want to keep yourself, and kind of be mindful of that ahead of time so that you're not caught off guard by your own emotions, right? And also being mindful of why you're sharing what you are and how it can be helpful to the young person. So when it comes to teen dating, I am going to use the word dating because I feel like that's what a lot of the adults understand dating, right? But the thing is, it's not just dating. There's so many different terms, and this slide is going to be overwhelming purposefully. There are so many different words for dating, for romantic relationships, for intimate but non-romantic. Right, so exclusive, they're only dating each other. Freckling is like freckles that fade in the sun. You have lots of little tiny relationships that just go away eventually. Just talking usually isn't just talking. Talking usually means there's something going on there. Hanging out, deep liking, going back in their social media to show that they're looking at all of their stuff in their social media. Non-date dates, right? They all have different connotations and different meanings. The one thing I want to stress, and why I don't define all of these, is because we'll never know the lingo, right? When I was young, there was always stuff my parents didn't understand, right? And I think it's really powerful as an adult to acknowledge that we're not going to know the lingo. We can't keep up with it. But what we can do is we can get the general ideas that we can talk with them easily about, that then they can apply it to all of this, the different way they think about things. And also just admitting, hey, I don't understand what that means. Tell me about it. That does a couple of things. First of all, it lets them know, it shows you're open and you're willing to admit that you don't know something. And you can also establish a common language. You could get a starting point together. And then last but not least, is that it says You are the expert in what's going on in your life right now to the young person, right? It is saying, I do take you seriously because I care about how you experience this issue, because I know it's different than how I experienced it as a young person. And again, I think that's a real strong connection point. So now that we've set that stage of kind of getting comfortable starting these conversations, let's learn a little bit more about why this is so serious, why we want to talk about this. 1 in 3 teens will experience dating violence before high school graduation. That includes physical violence by a dating partner, sexual violence by a dating partner, and stalking by a dating partner. And it's serious. And a couple more ages. I hear a lot when I go to new places, or when I first started, and I was trying to get into schools for the first time, I kept hearing, oh, well, we don't have to teach them this until they go to college, right? 72% of 8th and 9th graders say that they are already dating. They've got romantic interests, right? So you got to start young. And there's threads and commonness between different issues. So for instance, kids who say that they bully others in middle school, they are 7 times more likely to later on report having hit their dating partner in high school. So what that shows me is that the language of respectful relationships actually starts much younger, with respectful and safe friendships as well. 1 in 15 children a year witness domestic violence. So even if we're not talking about the teens' relationships, they are getting messages about relationships from the world around them. A new study showed that over 80% of the teens surveyed said that they primarily get most of their information about relationships from their parents or guardians. So their family members still are the primary place they get information. And again, this age range, it's serious. Girls and women aged 16 to 24 are 3 times more likely to experience domestic violence than at any other point in their life. And young boys also experience relationship violence. And a lot of times they face a lot of stigma and people not believing them when they go to disclose it. They face kind of an additional hurdle there of getting help. And it has serious impacts. And a lot of these issues you'll kind of hear about on its own, right? But it's important to connect it back to some of these root causes. Kids who experience violence, who experience dating violence, they are more likely to experience or engage in self-harm or harmful behaviors. They're more likely to have suicide thoughts. There are higher rates of teen pregnancy in abusive relationships, higher rates of drug and alcohol abuse, higher rates of depression and anxiety, even post-traumatic stress disorder, and an increased chance that the survivor will have an abusive relationship in the future. So having experienced dating violence as a teen makes it more likely that they would either be abusive to their future partners or be a victim of abuse in future relationships, right? Increases both of those risks. So it is important to have these conversations now. I want to talk a little bit. It's for us, it's not just trying to help people understand which behaviors are helpful and harmful, or are healthy or harmful. And that's because we can never talk about all behaviors. I would sit here all day talking about every single behavior that's harmful. So what I like to do instead is try to give you the tools to explain why something is harmful, to explain why something is healthy or unhealthy or abusive. And at the heart of that is power and control. I first like to define power and control in the healthy, because power and control can have a lot of different meanings. So I like to first define it in terms of healthy power and control. So I want you to think about, what does it mean for you to have power and control over your own life? What does it mean for you to have power and control over your own life? We've asked this question of thousands of people, and we typically get questions or answers that involve choices, decisions, being able to do what I want, being able to set my own goals and to work towards those goals, being able to set my own boundaries and say what I want from relationships and what I want from life, right? And so we've taken all of those answers and we boiled them down to 3 words. choices, boundaries, and consent. So the ability to make choices or decisions freely without manipulation, threats, fear. The ability to set your own boundaries or limits, to say what's important or what feels safe to you, right? And it could be physical boundaries, it could be emotional, material, even financial boundaries. And the ability to give and take away consent or permission, to say yes or no to things. And again, that could be physical, sexual, emotional, material. Yes, you can use my phone. Financial. No, I won't pay this for you, right? So I want you to think now about a slightly different question. How does it feel? How do you feel when you're able to make your own decisions freely? When people respect your boundaries and you feel confident enough in knowing which boundaries are okay for you, or people listen to your no's, how does that feel? People before have said it helps them feel strong, confident, happy, good, powerful, right? Empowered, safe. That's the key word, safe. Healthy relationships are ones that have equal power and control. Both people are able to freely make decisions, to set boundaries or limits, and to give or take away consent. And there's always going to be compromise, but both people should be able to freely consent to the decisions that are made. They shouldn't be pressured or manipulated or feared into them, right? And that's where we feel safe, when there's equal power and control. Abusive behaviors are meant to take away power and control, to limit someone's choices, boundaries, or consent, or violate them. And now I want you to think about what that feels like. How does it feel if someone's trying to pressure you or ignore your decisions, if they are violating your boundaries or ignoring your no's? How does that feel? People have said before that it makes them feel helpless, hopeless, unsafe, scared, trapped, powerless, right? Those are strong, strong words. And that's what we're talking about. And by first framing this in the positive of healthy relationships, it does a couple of things. It makes it so much easier to tell the young people why behaviors are harmful. Why does something feel bad? Well, it feels bad because they're manipulating your decisions. It feels bad because you said no and they ignored that no, right? That makes it easier for them. Like, let's say we don't list a certain behavior. That makes it easier for the young person to go, hey, yeah, okay, we haven't talked about this behavior, but I know I have the right to make my own decisions in a relationship. And I know I have the right to say yes or no. And my partner is manipulating that, right? It provides a good test and that they can apply then. By understanding the why it feels bad, it's easier for them to identify the behaviors that are harmful. And also, it explains, it helps us feel empathy for types of harm that aren't physical. So for instance, people will say, oh, emotional abuse or verbal abuse isn't as bad as physical abuse. But that's not true, because physical abuse is about power and control. It's about taking away someone's power and control. It's about making them feel unsafe, right? And we can feel unsafe even without physical violence, right? So it shows how even relationships where there's not physical violence can still be harmful, can still be so scary, and feel like the teen is being trapped. Okay. And again, peer relationships should have equal power and control. I will say for the parents on here, we always get the questions from the teens. Well, my mom makes me do this, or my dad makes me do that, right? This is for peer relationships, so the same age group. We understand, especially as they're minors, right, that there's rules and there's places where they can't have equal power and control, right? You're there for their safety. And you're setting those house rules, right? So because that's not a peer relationship. That relationship inherently starts out a little unequal. However, that being said, it does provide a way for you to think about ways to kind of promote choices, even if there is those boundaries, those structures, those rules. In what ways can we promote choice? In what ways can we allow the young people to say yes or no to things, right? By being able to provide that in some capacity, it helps them feel safe, even when we are setting rules that they can't control, right? But we are talking about peer relationships. I always say the parents and guardians set the choice. All right. So I want to talk about this question. This is a question we get, or a kind of a comment. We talk a little bit about how, let's say someone says you can't talk to somebody else. Now that we're dating, you can't talk to someone else. And this person says, if I'm dating someone, it's only respectful to him for me to stop talking to other guys. Why are you saying this is abusive? It's how you show you're loyal and trustworthy. And so the key word when teens kind of say this is choice. The relationship can look any way that the teen wants, as long as they are free to make that choice, as long as they said yes to that, the way those two interact with each other and with other people, right? It becomes harmful if, let's say, this teen's partner told them, you can't make that decision, I'm making it for you, you can't talk to them, right? It's that choice, it's that individual power, that's what makes it abusive, not necessarily the behavior itself. And I hope that kind of makes that clear on why I love that choices, boundaries, consent framework. It makes it so much just more relevant to the young person themselves. So we get a lot from adults, from teens, is how do I set boundaries? And so we love this framework called the rights and responsibilities framework. And it's a way that it's a type of language that you can use to help a teen set their boundaries. And again, it also provides another clear litmus test for unhealthy, toxic, abusive behaviors. And I want to stress, we're using this language right now for, teen relationships, but you can absolutely change the language for this and begin talking to the young person about healthy and respectful friendships. So again, these things are in dating relationships, but they can absolutely apply in friendships as well. So I have the right to not be abused or bullied emotionally, physically, sexually, verbally by my friend or dating partner. I have the right to fall out of love with someone, to end a relationship or friendship safely and respectfully. I have the right to safely express my own thoughts and opinions, and to have my own thoughts and opinions that are different from my friends or partners. I have the right to have my own friends and to spend time with them. I have the right to say no and to change my mind. And again, that could be physical, sexual, emotional, any of that. I have the right to be respected and loved and to live a peaceful life. I have the right to grow as an individual and not be criticized for it. And young people will say, well, what if someone's cheated before? That means I have the right to say that they can't talk to somebody else, right? And we talk about what that word rights means. Right is something they have. They don't have to earn it, and it can't be taken away, even if they've made a mistake before. If both people decide to be in that relationship, even if there's been mistakes before, they agree to enter that relationship safely and respectfully, right? And they agree to this. And if they can't agree to this, then that's a sign that maybe this relationship isn't beneficial for either of them, right? But they have these rights even if they make mistakes. Responsibilities, and this balances out, right? It's the other side. I have the responsibility to not abuse my partner or friend. I cannot blame anyone or anything else but myself if I'm abusive, even if I've been wronged, right? We're each responsible for our own actions. Alcohol or drugs cannot be used as excuses for abuse. It is my responsibility to understand that a relationship is just one part of my life and one part of my partner's life. Each of us have our own friendships, hobbies, activities that are just as important. It is my responsibility to change my behaviors if I'm abusive. No one else is responsible for fixing me. I am responsible for my own life. I am not responsible for my partner's actions, and they don't have to be responsible for my actions. I am responsible for communicating clearly and openly and to respect the privacy of my partner, right? So these are just ways to kind of promote that equal power and control. So the official definition of dating abuse is a pattern of intimidating or manipulative behaviors used to exert power and control over a partner, again, to make their choices, to ignore their boundaries or to set boundaries for them, right? To take away their right to say yes or no. You'll hear me use the words dating violence and dating abuse the same. They are the same thing. A lot of times people think that dating violence or even domestic violence is when it's physical and abuse is when it's non-physical, like it's emotional or verbal, but that's not the case. They both explain the same thing. The thing is that a lot of times if there is physical violence, there's other forms of abuse too, and those are also just as harmful, as we saw in that power and control activity. But it's just that we wanted to show that it's more than physical violence, but that you can use those terms interchangeably. They both dating violence or dating abuse can include any combination at all of physical, sexual, emotional, verbal, financial, digital abuse, stalking, spiritual abuse. We'll talk a little bit about all of that later. And again, non-physical abuse is still a form of violence and has similar long-term impacts. Even if there's no violence, someone can still experience symptoms of PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. Something to note is that abuse does tend to increase in frequency and intensity, even if there are apologies and promises to change. So let's say a young person comes to you and starts disclosing some behaviors or some things that are going on. And even if you don't think it's serious right now, if there's kind of a pattern of these behaviors, unfortunately, there is a risk and a tendency for those behaviors to get worse over time. Also, and something else to keep in mind is that unfortunately, one of the most dangerous times in an abusive relationship is as the relationship is ending. So it's instead of just saying to someone, just break up with them, like focus on how can we do this safely? How can we keep you safe, right? Calling our helpline to do safety planning is one way. But it's important, again, to not dismiss behaviors just because they don't seem that bad. Unfortunately, they do tend to escalate, and even behaviors that don't seem that bad can still be really harmful. Also, abuse can happen in any type of relationship, casual or serious, online or in person, even long after a relationship ends or after the partner, the abusive partner starts seeing someone new. Abuse is not about love, it's not about jealousy, it is about power and control, right? And that desire for power and control can happen even after the relationship ends. Okay. So, real teen question. How can I tell if a relationship is abusive or just toxic? You have to be careful with the word toxic. A lot of teens, a lot of young people use that, and I feel like it's a big buzzword right now. I ask that people be mindful of it because abusive behaviors are toxic, absolutely. And a lot of times, if someone is describing a quote unquote toxic relationship, they really are also describing abuse and dating abuse. And so we don't want people to take it less seriously just because they're using the word toxic. So that's something to be mindful of, right? And so it absolutely, there are relationships where there are harmful behaviors happening, but they may not be abusive. And you're looking at that pattern of power and control, and you're also looking overall at that kind of balance of power and control. If you have one person that's always making the decisions, that's always manipulating the other person, right? That's more likely to indicate abuse. The reality, though, is we take whatever anybody says to us. If someone comes to us and says that I am experiencing an abusive relationship, we listen to them. There's no test they have to go through, no proof, right? If they feel uncomfortable in that relationship, we're going to be able to talk to them. Okay. This is a power and control wheel, and I know it's a bit small on this. The website is there, so you can look online and zoom in. This shows that at the heart of abuse, it's again that power and control. And this shows a lot of the different types of violence. Along that outer ridge, you see physical and sexual violence. Those can actually occur in the abusive teen relationships. It could also just be a threat of it. I will hurt you, right? Or it could be what we call a perceived threat. A perceived threat is when they may not say it, but the other person fears it. So let's say someone smashes a wall and the other person is really scared, right? And the person who smashed the wall, maybe they say, oh, I didn't mean anything. It's not like I'm going to hurt you or I threatened to hurt you. But that other person can still be scared and fear violence. So that's an example of a perceived threat. So I'm going to go through some of these, give some of the most common examples, right? So, and think about through all of this, how it's impacting someone's choices, boundaries, and consent. So you have anger or emotional abuse, put downs, mind games, calling someone names. Gaslighting is a big buzzword right now. Gaslighting is basically making someone question the reality, lying despite every evidence to the contrary, right? Every piece of evidence pointing a different way. Being dismissive. Oh, your feelings aren't real. You're overreacting. You're too emotional, right? Dismissing the way you feel or view the world. Using social status, peer pressure, or privilege, this could be using any type of power to take away someone else's power. I'm more popular than you, I spend more money, or I have more money, so I make more decisions. It could be gender privilege. I'm the guy, I'm the girl, this is how you have to treat me. It could be threatening rumors or spreading rumors around other people, kind of that social status, right? It could be financial privilege, right? Or even documented. We have young people who are undocumented and their partners have threatened to call ICE on them and their family. It could be in an LGBTQ relationship. Maybe someone's going to threaten to out somebody to their family or friends if they're not out yet, right? And so using their type of power to take away someone else's power. Intimidation, looks, actions, gestures that cause fear or send messages, slamming things, destroying property, just showing weapons. We hear all the time from teens whose partners break their phones. That's a common one. Or throw things towards them without actually hitting them. One young teen said to me, they said, well, they always threw things at me, but I never thought it was abusive because they never actually hit me with those things, right? But it's not about the physical violence, it's about the fear, manipulation, and control. Minimizing, denying, blaming, saying it's not that bad, it didn't happen, and if it did happen, it's your fault. Now, there may be things you understand. We hear a lot from young people that they're worried about their partner. Maybe their partner, they'll say to us, my boyfriend or girlfriend's parents are abusive to them. It's all they know. They're trying to get better. I can help them. I understand. You can have compassion for those experiences and still deserve safety now. And that's what we stress to people is you can care about someone and you can care about their experiences and still expect them to treat you safely, right? You still deserve safety now. Alcohol or drugs, similarly, they'll say, well, I was drunk, so it doesn't matter. And what we say to that is that it's still a responsibility. Does something hurt less just because someone was under the influence? Not really, right? It still causes harm. And I always, one teen really pushed back and they said, I'm under the influence. My mind changes, so I'm not responsible for what I do. And the example we always give, if someone's driving under the influence and they get a ticket, does the car get charged with a DUI? No, right? The person behind the wheel still gets charged. It's still their responsibility. And unfortunately, a lot of times you will actually see, even if there are some behaviors, let's say a teen is only violent when they're drinking, you'll still see a lot of these other behaviors when they're sober. Sexual coercion, forcing, pressuring, manipulating someone to have sex. We hear this all the time from teens that they're told they're leading people on if they don't want to have sex, or they're going too slow, or they can't change their mind, or this is what's expected of them if they're in a relationship, or this is what they should do if they love somebody. Right. So we hear that so much. They feel so much pressure when they're in relationships to engage in sexual activity. Threats, if you leave me, I'll hurt you, I'll hurt myself, I'll hurt somebody else. Isolation, frequently using jealousy as an excuse, controlling who they see, who they talk to, constantly accusing them of cheating. Cyberbullying, basically any of this happening online. Demanding to know where someone is at all times, expecting immediate messages. And that doesn't sound like much. Like, it's often dismissed as, oh, that's just a message, text message. How is that bad? I spoke to one young individual who said they were always expecting me to text back, and I never knew what time of day it was. And if I didn't text back, they accused me of being a bad boyfriend or girlfriend. That person's grades started dropping. She dropped out of programs she loved because it felt like she couldn't get away. She felt trapped. Right. Not on here listed, but a recent study shows that 2/3 of all teens actually experience some form of financial abuse from a dating partner. So financial abuse is like forcing someone to pay for things, stealing their money. It could be forcing or pressuring them to skip school, destroy their homework, show up at their jobs, try to get them fired, harass them at work, not give them rides to their jobs, or things, or take away their keys. Right. So just basically manipulating their ability to make or spend money. And that also includes schooling, because our education impacts our ability to make money. So there's also spiritual abuse, making fun of someone's religion, preventing them from using their religion. All right. And teens experience these. And what we found over the years is that they actually experience a lot of these abusive behaviors in the very similar way to how adults experience abusive behaviors in their own relationships. This is an equality wheel. I'm not going to go through it. It's just one more tool in terms of being able to talk about healthy relationships and helping young people understand why behaviors are healthy or unhealthy. So real teen question time. What if they were only abusive once? We get this a lot. You need to be careful about this question. This question is usually used when they've only been physically violent once. They've only been physically violent once, right? But a lot of times physical violence doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? It doesn't happen by itself. You're going to see other behaviors. So what you're really looking for is like, well, what other behaviors are going on? How do you feel in that relationship, right? What other patterns are happening? Maybe it was just a one-time accident. You're not going to see a pattern, right? But focus again on overall that young person's choices, boundaries, and consent in that relationship. Well, are you able to make your own decisions? Do they listen when you say no to things, right? So go back to how your teen feels in that relationship to be able to tell whether or not it's harmful. I do want to touch briefly upon sexual violence and define that a little bit. Unfortunately, the numbers we see are very high. When we go into schools and we let students ask questions anonymously, we find that we get so many questions about sexual violence. So 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys before turning 18 will experience some form of child sexual abuse. 7% of high school students report being physically forced to have sexual intercourse in the previous year. So I believe the number is actually a little bit higher. Up to 12% of high school girls in a recent survey reported having been physically forced to have sexual intercourse in the previous year. You're looking at higher than numbers cumulatively, like of all high school students before they graduate or before they turn 18. 56% of girls and 40% of boys in grades 7 to 12 have experienced sexual harassment. Sexual harassment are unwanted comments, gestures, about sex. It could be constantly asking someone out. It could be making jokes about someone's gender or sexual orientation. Those are all forms of sexual harassment. LGBTQ teens are at higher risk. 81% of transgender youth report sexual harassment. Almost 30% of bisexual or lesbian teen girls experience sexual assault. 24% of gay or bisexual teen boys are sexually assaulted. So 1 in 4. So unfortunately, they are at higher risk. I want to stress that it's not because of their identities that they are at higher risk. They are at higher risk because abuse is about power and control. And unfortunately, LGBTQ individuals usually face other forms of oppression. They usually face other forms of violence. And unfortunately, that makes it easier for other people to manipulate them. It makes it easier for other people to cause harm against them. So we want to stress it's not because of their identities, but because people find it easier to cause harm against them the way we view, and the way our society is set up. So definition, sexual violence is an act of power and control. So going back to that, violating choices, boundaries, consent, that involves unwanted or non-consensual behavior that is sexual in nature. It may also target someone's gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation. So for instance, someone being violent towards someone because they're transgender or because they're gay, that's a form of sexual violence. Other forms of sexual violence. So sexual violence is like an umbrella term that includes, but is not limited to, sexual assault. So those are unwanted or forced sexual activity, rape, for instance, sexual assault, sexual harassment, stalking, groping, indecent exposure, unwanted exposure to sexual content. It could also be like unknowing, someone taking pictures or videos unknowingly or sharing pictures or videos without consent. We want to stress that sexual violence is not about sex, attraction, love, jealousy, or anger. Just like dating abuse, it is about purposefully taking away someone's power and control. And unfortunately, sexual violence is often used in abusive relationships. It's usually you'll see it quite often used in abusive relationships. So when you're talking about sexual violence, the couple of key phrases we use is that sexual violence is wrong and often against the law. Sexual violence is about power and control. It is not about attraction or love, and it is never their fault. It is never their fault. It doesn't matter what they wore, what they've said yes to before. They always have the right to set their own boundaries and say no, and it's all of our responsibilities to respect that. Okay. I also want to point out that sexual harassment, sexual assault, and actually intimate partner violence as well, they all have their own kind of criminal definitions that vary state by state. However, something can be harmful and cause trauma and harm and hurt somebody, even if it doesn't meet like the legal level of criminal. So that even if something can't be charged, that doesn't mean it didn't happen, and it doesn't mean it's not harmful, right? We still want to take it seriously, and they can still seek services. I love this example, talking about consent. And this is talking about consent for sexual activity, but it's for anything. Like I said, even something as simple as, yes, you can use my phone, right? Feel good consent. True consent is freely given. It's not pressured. So going back to the phone, yes, you can use my phone. If someone said, oh, well, if you loved me enough, you would trust me to give me your phone number. Oh, if you didn't have anything to hide, you would let me in your phone, right? It wouldn't matter, right? That's not a freely given. That's kind of pressure and manipulation, right? That's not oh yeah, sure, go ahead and use my phone, right? Reversible. They have to be able to change their mind at any point. One young person, they specifically asked about sexual activity, they said, well, at what point can you change your mind until? And it was almost like they thought you can only say change your mind until a certain point, but that's not. Even in the middle of something, even while something's happening, anybody can change their mind at any time. And if someone doesn't stop when someone says to stop, then that crosses the line into sexual assault. It has to be informed, no tricks. They have to know what they're agreeing to. Everyone agrees, is on board, right, with what's happening. And again, sexual activity, but also any other forms of boundaries. And it has to be specific, given for every single action. And people will say like, oh, well, what if I, for everything that seems awkward, right? And so what I love to do is I'm a parent myself, and what I love to do is I love to start like building in consent as much as I can. I'd like to just show consent as much as I can, in non-sexual ways. So for instance, my partner, we can get into each other's phones, emails, everything. But for my kids, I know if I ask my husband to use my phone, he'll say yes, right? But what I do is to start modeling consent. I'll ask like, hey, can I use your phone? Like I'll specifically ask to show that I respect his right to say no, even if they've seen him say yes before, right? So begin to start modeling some of that consent. Even when you know someone's going to say yes, ask for permission any chance you get. So then it will become a lot less awkward, or strange for the young people to begin asking permission for things. You cannot freely consent if someone is pressuring or threatening you. Yes is not a yes if it's a pressured yes. There's one example we give where one scenario we talk about where in the scenario, one of the partners keeps pressuring the other person to send them suggestive pictures or naked pictures. And eventually that person says yes and does it, right? And we get a lot of pushback from the young people. They say, well, they said yes, so they did it, so that's not bad, right? But we say that that's not a real yes. If they only did it to stop someone from asking, or if they only did it because they were accused of being a bad boyfriend or bad girlfriend, right? That's not a feel-good yes. That doesn't feel good now or later, because it's impacting their ability to freely make choices, right? There's a couple of other rules when it comes to sexual activity for young people. So first of all, they cannot consent to sexual activity if they are intoxicated or incapacitated by drugs or alcohol, if they are asleep or unconscious, if they are being pressured or threatened, and that could be physical, but it also could be emotional manipulation, like threaten or pressure. Underage, and in New Jersey, under 13. Under 13, they cannot consent legally to any sort of sexual activity. And that is a mandatory report to the state if someone finds out. And in New Jersey, all of us, everybody is a mandated reporter. So if we have any knowledge of under 13 that is engaging in sexual activity, that is a mandated report. New Jersey teens between the ages of 13 and 15 can consent with peers who are up to 4 years older than them. So for instance, a 13 can legally say yes to having sex with a 16-year-old. But once that 16-year-old is 4 years older, 17, then that is no longer legal, right? They can be charged with statutory rape, even if it is done with quote consent. Legally, they're not able to consent. We get this question a lot. It's when we start introducing some of these ages, you'll start to see the young people in the crowd. We get a lot of instances. We get a lot of instances of 7th and 8th graders dating older students. It comes up a lot in high school with like freshmen and seniors. So it's something to be mindful of, to let them know that there are kind of legal constraints to this. And if you ever have any questions on this, we're giving we're giving schools access to like a flow chart so the kids can ask those questions. But also you're more than welcome to call our helpline and they can clarify some of these as well. So real teen question time. What if my partner is guilting me into not using birth control? This is a form of sexual assault, right? They are pressuring, they're limiting their choices, right? When we're talking about consent, it's specific for every action, right? Everyone needs to be on board. Another question that we get, and this unfortunately we've seen a big increase in. I feel like there's been I feel like lately there's kind of a trend of pranks on TikTok, and so a lot of people are viewing something like this as like a prank. However, this is actually sexual assault. What if my partner took his condom off without telling me during sex? This is a form of sexual activity or sexual assault, because it is not informed. That person consented to sexual activity with a condom, right? They didn't, so they didn't agree to this next part. That was a trick. It wasn't informed. That absolutely crosses the line into sexual assault. And many states now make this criminal. It does reach the level of criminal behavior. I do want to be mindful. When we go into schools, we never we answer the questions, right, that we get from the teens, right? So we always want to stress, we're never going to say to someone like this has to happen. And we never say like you have to have sex. This always has that, right? But we want to make sure that they do at least have the tools to talk about it when they are confronted with it. A lot of times I'll hear like, oh, well, my mom doesn't let me date, or a parent will say to me, well, I don't let them date, right? And you can have those rules, absolutely. And we always say to teens, listen to your parents' rules, listen to your guardian's rules, your household rules. That's absolutely what you need to listen to, right? That's not an equal power and control relationship, right? However, I recommend for parents, even if you have those rules in place, still have these conversations, because even if your teen's not dating, they're seeing it in their friends, they're seeing it in other classmates, they are seeing it on social media, and they have questions about it. And like I said, the recent studies show that teens really value their parents' opinions. They really value the opinions and thoughts about that their parents have around this topic. So hopefully I hope that this is making it a little easier to talk about this with them. Okay, here's another real teen question. If we talk about having sex before we start drinking, is it still consensual when we start having sex? And not really, right? Again, it has to be able to be reversible at any time. And if someone's under the influence, they're technically not able to consent. So that also means they technically wouldn't be able to take away consent if they wanted to change their mind. Someone said in response to that, this statement, well, but sex while drunk isn't really assault. It's a whole gray area, since it's possible to say yes while drinking. So what we say is, there is kind of that short time period. Well, really what we say for young people is it's illegal to be drinking anyway. You shouldn't be drinking underage, right? So that's really where we start. But again, because we know they are confronted that we still answer the questions. We say it, you know, there may be a point where someone is drinking, but technically isn't under the influence, but there is a very, very fine line, very, very fine line between sober consent, right, and drunken or intoxicated sexual assault. And if you're not 100% certain on what that is, don't make that decision, right? It is not a gray area. You do, if you don't want to harm someone, wait until people are sober. Okay, is how we do that. Is how we kind of apply that consent to the sexual activity in the relationships. All right. So now we get to kind of the response. We're nearing the end a little bit. How can I tell if my child is in an abusive relationship? So I will say, unfortunately, that a lot of the warning signs are similar to the warning signs of other serious issues, right? You may see that they start to change the way they act or dress. Maybe their partner wants them to dress more sexual, or maybe they want them to hide their body more so that they don't attract anyone else's attentions. You're with me now, so I don't want anyone else looking at you, right? So they'll start to hide more. They may also hide to cover bruises. The dress to hide the bruises. So they may, again, change the way they act or dress. We will have parents say that their personality changes a little bit. They start coming home right away and going right to their room. Again, they're teens, that they do that, right? But they maybe do that while they're always worried about texting their partner back. Oh, I've got to get back to them right now. They're going to get upset if I don't get back to them. Oh, they were worried about this. I have to do this, or they're going to be upset, right? They're constantly beginning to be fearful about how they respond to their partner. They may make excuses for their partner. Oh, they're just drunk, or they're hungry. They're having a bad day. That's why they're acting like this. Don't worry about it. Kind of tiptoeing around their partner and making excuses for them. They may stop hanging out with their friends. You may hear them say, oh, well, my partner doesn't like my friends anymore, or, oh, they don't support our relationship, so I'm not hanging out with them. Like the partner is like kind of turning the family or friends against them. Right? Saying, oh, your parents don't like me, so let's not hang out with them. So maybe they may turn against you too. Unexplained bruises or marks. So some of the most common, and I my camera a little bit for this. So some of the most common injuries you'll see. So you may see some bruising around the neck. Unfortunately, if someone has been strangled, it does happen. You may see red dots in the whites of their eyes, around their eyes. You may also see bruises on their arm, like someone grabbing the arm, lower arm or upper arm. You may also see if they have been hit or hurt in the midsection, which that's frequently a targeted area because it's easy to hide by clothes. You may see them kind of hunched, kind of being very protective of their middle section, kind of walking hunched over, walking very slowly. Something that's helpful in terms of kind of recognizing violence, right? When someone is scared, or when someone is in shock or experiencing trauma, and trauma is like they just really can't cope, their body's kind of in that fight or flight mode, they're trying to protect themselves. They tend to be very bad at making up excuses. So maybe you'll see like you'll see like a bruise on their arm, and they'll say, oh, I walked into a door, right? Like you'll see it, the excuses just won't match the injuries you're seeing, right? And if you see that in all this in all of these other behaviors, those are all some pretty pretty big red flags. One of the parents I spoke to said that their son was constantly being texted, would get nervous when he couldn't get back to her, grades started dropping, was always, oh, they're worried, I have to make them feel better, they're anxious, and they would make excuses. They would say, oh, their past boyfriend cheated on her, and that's why I have to prove to her, right? That's where we go back to the rights and responsibilities. Even if her past boyfriend cheated, right, it's not her new boyfriend's responsibility, right, to make her feel better, right? And it's not an excuse to start making someone feel scared or manipulated or like they have to fix everything, right? It's limiting their ability to make choices now, and that's not right. It's not a safe relationship for either person. If you're concerned, so the way we love to approach this, so think about a soft it's a phrase called couching. We call it, it's kind of a combination of coaching and counseling, but I like to think of an actual sofa, right? And it's nice and soft when you sit on it, hopefully frequently, right? So you want to kind of soften what you're about to say. You want to make it seem like it's not coming out of thin air, right? There's a reason. So the way we phrase it is you start with the phrase, hey, I'm concerned about you, I love you. Then you start to explain why, why you're bringing up this topic. I've seen you get really nervous when you're with your partner. I saw a bruise the other day. You want to normalize it a little bit. Sometimes that can mean there's something happening in someone's relationship. How are you feeling with your girlfriend? How are you feeling with your boyfriend? Do you feel safe with them? Right. So you have that question, but you're not jumping right there. Like, hey, are they hitting you? Are they treating you all right? Right. You soften it up. You show them you want to connect. You explain why. So they begin to see the behaviors too. Right. They can begin to make those connections, and you're really explaining why you're bringing that topic up. Right. So first of all, they may not disclose. Unfortunately, the majority of teens in an abusive relationship or the teens who've experienced sexual violence don't tell somebody. And if they do, they usually tell their friends instead of their parents. But do what you can. If you still are concerned, keep focusing on behaviors. Keep focusing on what they see, what you see in your child. Keep focusing on how your child feels. How does the young person feel in that relationship? Hey, do you feel like you can make your own decisions? If you say no, do they listen? Right? Do you feel happy to be with them? Right? Is it, are there times when you feel scared? Right? Focus on how the young person feels in that relationship. You want to focus on the partner's behaviors. You don't want to put down their partner. Like if you say, oh, I don't like them, they're bad news, that teen is going to shut down and become completely defensive, right? And maybe especially if there's been isolation and their partner is in their ear saying, oh, your parents don't like me, so you shouldn't talk to them, right? That will kind of validate that. So you want to be supportive. You want to focus on the behaviors and not put down the partner. And again, still be kind of compassionate. If their partner has gone through some things before, be compassionate for that and still focus on the fact that your child deserves to be safe now. Use the conversation to explore their options. Avoid telling them what to do. We always say that people in abusive relationships, their choices, boundaries, and consent are being taken away from them. So one of the best things you can do is model choices and boundaries and consent. Hey, I've noticed this. Is it all right if I give you a phone number, or is it all right if we talk about this a little bit? Begin to model consent and choices as much as you can with them. Keep on talking. You never know when some info will click. Unfortunately, they may make decisions you don't agree with. They need to be the one to leave that relationship by themselves, right? And that's really hard. They may have heard threats that you don't know about. They may, a lot of times this young person will say, well, I don't want the relationship to end. I just don't want them to stop. I just don't want them to hurt me anymore, right? So it's focusing on how can we keep you safe. So offer, hey, let's call Safe and Sound Somerset together. We do have the 24/7 helpline. They don't need to leave a relationship to call us. We can do safety planning, just provide supportive listening. They don't need to leave the relationship to call us. And it's not like if you're calling us, you say you want services. You can just talk it out. So that's a helpful way to talk to them about it. If you're worried about how the child is treating their partner, call it out. You don't want to ignore the behavior. As much as we don't like to admit it, we are social creatures and we want people's approval. And so, if we don't say anything and they think other people approve, they're more likely to continue. Don't let them blame the target or others. Recommend that they reach out to somebody, right? We can provide appropriate referrals for people who are causing harm in a relationship. Remind them that they can get in trouble. There's a lot of different behaviors in abusive relationships that can reach criminal levels, right? So they can get in trouble. And again, set examples. I can't stress this enough. Over 80% of young people say that the primary place they get information about relationships is from their parents, from the adults in their home. Oh, we hear this one a lot. I think I'm being abusive, but I'm really just insecure and don't have anyone else to talk to but my partner. I'm really anxious. Think about that girl I mentioned earlier whose partner cheated on her, right? We get that a lot. Like, oh, I'm just insecure, right? And again, we talk about how you may not be intending to be abusive, but you're limiting their choices, right? You may be controlling them and making them feel scared, right? And it's not their responsibility to cure their insecurities, right? It's not their responsibility to fix everything. Imagine how much pressure that is. If you're the only person solely responsible for someone's well-being, which I know as parents, a lot of times we are for the younger people, right? But for the relationships that are supposed to be equal, right? To be the only person, how I would ask that person, how would they feel making decisions? How would they feel bringing something up to you, right? Would they be okay with that? And instead focusing on how can you get the support you need, right? Without making your partner feel like they don't have equal power and control in that relationship. What if I'm worried about my partner's mental state if I break up with them? Unfortunately, we get a lot of comments. One of the most common things we hear is, oh, my partner said they would kill themselves if I broke up with them. My partner said they would commit suicide if I broke up with them. And people don't think of that as abusive because they think of abuse as physical harm against one person, right? But it's about power and control. And now think about that power and control balance. And if someone says, if you leave me, I'm going to hurt myself, that power balance has totally shifted. That is no longer consensual relationship. So we stress that again, you can be worried about someone, you can want to get them help, but you deserve to be safe and you deserve to be in a consensual relationship. You shouldn't feel trapped in a relationship you don't want to be in. Right. And so it's, connect them with resources, do some safety planning with them. So if they want to leave, they can and feel safe doing so and feel like they've supported their partner enough to do so. Right. But ultimately that's not, they can leave a relationship if they need to. Other key discussion points: love should feel good. Impact is better than intent. Again, kind of like that one person. I think I'm being abusive, but I'm just insecure, right? Even if they don't intend to be abusive, if the impact is that that's not a safe relationship for that other person, that's more important than what that person intended. Everyone deserves to be treated equally in their relationships. Someone asked me, well, what about gender roles? Someone said to me, my religion supports gender roles. And we say equal power and control doesn't necessarily mean you both have the exact same roles in that relationship. Your relationship can look the way you want it to, but where it's safe is when both people are free to consent to those roles and are free to change those roles and are free to set their own boundaries, right? And that's when that's an equal relationship, right? That's when that's an equal relationship. You can have different roles, but where the safety comes in, if those roles are freely consented to. And I also want to stress, just because everyone does it doesn't mean everyone should be doing it or everyone wants to be doing it. And also, anytime a teen says this to me and says, oh, everyone's doing it, I say, have you talked to everybody? Maybe they're not, maybe the people you've heard, but you don't hear from everybody. A couple of fun kind of questions, maybe you're listening to a song on the radio, or people don't really listen to the radio nowadays, but you're listening to, a streaming song in the car. You're like, hey, what does this song say? What's this? What are these lyrics? What are you hearing here? Kind of asking the young person, how do you fight? Can you think of a time that maybe you would have fought differently? Like, how did the way you fight change the outcome or change the relationship or friendship? Again, start with friendships. Who's someone that has an unhealthy relationship? Why? Why is it unhealthy? Whose relationship would you like yours to be like, and why? How do you want to feel in a relationship? How do you want to feel in a friendship? What can you do if someone threatens you or pressures you or tells you to do something you're uncomfortable? How, has that ever happened? What did you do? Was it easy? Was it hard? How can I help you? How can I help you say no? How can I help you set boundaries in the future? What are some relationship rules or expectations you've heard about? How might they lead to an unhealthy or healthy relationship, right? So these are just some examples of kind of general questions as a way to begin to kind of share values, kind of get a feel for how your team thinks about things. I would say the car is a great place to talk, or even just sitting down. One parent said to me, oh, it's the best when we sit down and play video games, because eye contact tends to creep the young people out. So they're both sitting there looking straight ahead, not at each other, right? And it makes it less threatening and easier. So they're playing a game, but they're also chatting about real serious topics. And that's the same reason that another person I know said the car is a great place to talk to the young person, because you're both looking somewhere else. All right. And it's just a less threatening place. All right. Just a reminder, there are so many resources that we have. Unfortunately, a lot of times when I talk about young people, the adults do also may see dynamics in their own lives or in their own past that they would like support on. So I want to stress our helpline is available 24/7, call or text, for anybody, for the teens, for the young people, for friends or family, for people who have had relationships decades ago and want support. It provides supportive listening, safety planning, referrals, resources, and connects them to our other programs. We do have an emergency safe house that includes the Financial Empowerment Center and the Domestic Violence Housing First Initiative. We have response teams. In addition to the SART program, which I spoke about earlier, we also have the domestic violence response teams. We have domestic violence liaison who actually works with the Department of Child Protection and Permanency, DCPP, to support families who are involved with that system, but who also have domestic violence. We have extensive counseling services, free of charge, for adults and children, not just supportive and informational counseling, but we also have specific post-traumatic stress disorder treatment for adults and children. So some really fantastic services there. We're starting also a KITE group, support group for people. That's an ongoing group that people can join anytime for support and information. We also have our community outreach and prevention programs, as well as legal advocacy. I have representatives at the courthouse, I believe, every day of the week. We're there all day Thursdays when they see, at the family court, when they see restraining orders. We provide support, information, and kind of help people through that process and provide information through that restraining order process. Okay. And again, all of these are free at no charge. And we never ask for ID or insurance or nothing like that. All right. I want to stress again, if you or someone else you know need help, you are more than welcome to call our 24/7 confidential helpline at 866-685-1122. You can also visit our website, www.safe-sound.org. We have a whole host of resources, including articles. If you go to under resources and the Learning Center, we are constantly putting up new tools, new resources, handouts in English and Spanish. Also, I forgot to mention, if you call or text the helpline, we do utilize a language line that can translate into, I believe, over 200 different languages, if you need that. So we can serve anybody, regardless of language, on that helpline. All right. So that's the end of our presentation. I'm going to stop recording. Thank you so much for being here.